Bună ziua, doamnelor și domnilor, ne întâlnim la o ediție special Adevărul. Îl avem invitat pe fostul prim-ministru al Georgiei, domnul Lado Gurgenidze. Alături de mine se află colegul meu, Georgiei. Avem privilegiul de a vorbi despre economie și reforme în economie cu un fost prim-ministru care a schimbat pur și simplu fața țării sale într-o perioadă extrem de dificilă. A fost prim-ministru între 2007 și 2008, într-o perioadă marcată în Georgia de conflictul cu Rusia. Dar vom vorbi în continuare despre reformele economice și rezultatul acestor reforme. Mr. Gurgenidze, welcome in Romania.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here to speak about economics crisis and economic reforms. Which is the situation now in Georgia?
You know, it's on the economic front. It's has normalized quite some time ago. There's growth. The country's growing at about 6% a year, which is not quite like the 10-12% we had gotten used to before the crisis.
But it's a huge growth.
It's
Speaking
not bad.
about Romania and the European Union.
Yeah, the inflow of investment is gradually returning to its normal level. You know, before the crisis, we used to get close to $1.5–2 billion a year of private capital inflows, which may not sound like very much, but when you consider that we're only an $11 billion GDP, that's a huge amount, proportionately speaking, you know, relative to the size of GDP. Now, it's about $1 billion a year, but you know, I think it will build back up to 1.5 or 2 billion over the next few years now. So it's back to normal in the sense of the economic development and so on and so forth. Now, of course, the sad fact and the unacceptable fact remains that 20% of the territory is under the occupation by Russian troops, but yeah, that's the case.
You have some information about Romania, about economic situation in Romania. How can you describe the present situation in Romania?
You know, I think, I mean, look, I'd be lying if I said I'm an expert on the Romanian economy or any other economy perhaps other than the Georgian one, but in general, it is my observation that in the past 2 years, 2–3 years, the policy responses to the crisis and the post-crisis challenges in many cases have been, at the very least, miscalibrated and, you know, in the worst case, really just misapplied or even ill-conceived, right? I am decidedly not of a Keynesian ilk. I'm actually quite the opposite of that. So I think, you know, what we have seen in very many cases worldwide, including in the richest countries, is an overreaction by policymakers, or the over-loosening of the monetary policy, right? The excessively high budget deficits, et cetera, et cetera. It is to some degree in the very nature of the government, perhaps, to be activist and try to, you know, respond like that. But as we all know, and the latest crisis is a simple manifestation of that, you know, government activism always has unintended consequences, right? And unintended consequences are also, by virtue of being unintended, they're very difficult to contain, and so on and so forth, right? So, look, you know, I'm not going to say anything new, and that applies to my country as well as Romania, as well as the United States or any other country in the world, right? The less government interference or intervention in the economy, the less government per se, the smaller the government's fiscal footprint is in the economy, the higher the degree of freedom, the more natural the state of the economy, and the higher the quotient of human happiness as a result. I'm a libertarian. I believe in that, and I think that applies worldwide.
Which are the differences between your reform, your economic reforms, and what is happening now in Europe and, of course, in Romania? We are speaking every day about budgetary cuts and cuts and cuts. This is a right approach?
Well, I mean, the very short answer to your question, the very short and general answer is yes, budget cuts are, obviously the right thing to do in general. But going back to how Georgia's reform process started, right? We were in a place in 2003 when the country was really a failed state, right? Rampant corruption, no public institutions working, no foreign investment coming in, very widespread feeling of hopelessness. 20% of the population, roughly 20%, had left in search of whatever better opportunities abroad. I myself was, one of them. I had left in 1990, didn't return until 2004. And, it was basically a country where nothing functioned, right? The police, the army, the ambulances, the local municipalities,
education,
infrastructure, roads, nothing functioned, literally, right? And even though the state only managed to collect about 15% of GDP in taxes back then, the corruption tax was huge on top of that. Our estimates showed that it was another 15% at least, maybe 20% of that, right?
Which was the average of the black market economy?
It was about 40%.
40%.
Yeah, very high, right? So into this situation, right, sort of, what's now been called the Rose Revolution kind of gets born and gets triggered by that situation. And as a result, then you have a visionary leader with a very, very strong popular mandate, and who managed to assemble a group of people around him with very radical and free-thinking ways. But the key thing, I guess, not to sort of sound overly ideological, is that whatever it is the government had set out to do, it did it simultaneously, right? And that's a very important thing to consider for any country at the early stage of the reform. The incremental approach hardly works. Reforms are hard work.
Which are the first 5 reforms?
Well, I'll give you the first or the main 5 areas, right? So, look, I think in any country, and we just managed to push it almost to the logical extreme, right? First of all, you're talking about low, flat taxes, right?
Yeah.
No progressive taxation, and low, as important as flat, right? Basically, you're talking about sound money, right? Ideally free float. Well, the ideal situation, I think, for any country really would be to just, any small country anyhow, to really do away with the local currency and dollarize essentially, or euroize, or whatever you call it. But I mean, again, let's not go to the extremes, right? So sound money, free float, no capital controls, no currency controls, full capital account convertibility, right? Okay, these are the 2 pillars. On top of that, you build free labor, or free labor market, right? What that means is the freedom of hiring people, and very flexible laws in terms of
the labor code,
making people redundant. Yes, the World Bank thinks we have one of the best labor codes in the world, among the top 5, in terms of the flexibility, right? So, what makes a good labor code is when the state essentially withdraws itself and stops interfering in the relationship between the employer and the employee, right? Yeah. It is for them to decide, right? The terms of the contract, or on an at-will basis, and all this other stuff. Free labor, free trade, very important, right? So these are the key areas. Now, when we started, we had really nothing, literally, right? We had taxes that were, first of all, many. There were 23 different kinds of taxes, but very poorly collected, like I said. They were all progressive, and the tax code was, just permeated with the exemptions, credit rebates, and so on and so forth, right? So what came to replace all that was a very simple system, right? There's only 6 taxes and 4 principal ones, right? VAT, corporate tax, personal income tax, excise. Basically, that's it.
Income tax, yes.
The taxes are flat, and the taxes by now are very low. We're talking.
Which is the average?
No, there's no average. They're flat, so you know, it's
yes.
15% flat. Okay?
15.
Yeah, for corporations, and it's 20% for individuals. But 20% may not sound particularly low, but please keep in mind there's absolutely no social tax or social insurance in the country. That's another very important thing, right? So if you employ me, for example, as an employer, it doesn't cost you anything extra in social tax or whatever, insurance.